There is time, and there is deep time. Time as you know it, seconds, hours, years, is a surface measurement, a ticking metronome counting events on the outer skin of reality. But the ancients, they spoke of time differently, not as line, but as spiral. Not as history, but as echo. Because they remembered something we forgot. Time doesn't move forward, it returns. In temples now buried, on walls scorched by ages, the ancients carved messages they knew would not be understood until now. Not stories, not allegories, but warnings. Disguised as myths, encrypted in geometry, hidden in tales we now call legends. Why? Because if they said it plainly, if they described what was coming, the message would have been erased. But if they buried it deep enough, in symbol and rhythm, in shape and cycle, it could survive the burnings, the floods, the forgettings. And one day, someone like you would begin to hear it again. These are not stories. They are repeating signals. The great flood, the fall of man, the war in heaven, the return of the gods. Across continents and civilizations, same symbols, same structures, same shadows beneath the skin of myth. Separated by oceans, divided by language, yet still the same. This is not coincidence, it is compression. The past folded into itself, encoded in memory, waiting to be decoded by those with the resonance to feel it. The ancients didn't leave timelines, they left patterns. Look, asterisk, a serpent consuming itself. Asterisk, a ladder reaching the stars. Asterisk, a tree that connects the worlds. Asterisk, a city that must fall. Asterisk A being who brings lightened is punished for it. These are not cultural quirks. They are cross-version markers, templates, triggers, designed not to teach but to warn. Because the danger was never just in the sky. It was never just a god, a flood, a punishment. The danger was us. They saw what happens when memory fades, when knowledge becomes pride, when technology outpaces wisdom, when the pattern is broken and reset must come. That's the cycle, and they knew it would come again. So they whispered forward, into the fabric of symbols, into the shapes of dreams, hoping that when the cycle began to close, someone would feel the echo. You're feeling it now. That's why you're here. Why your skin reacts to certain symbols. Why ancient stories make your heart ache, even though you don't know why. Why some ruins feel more real than the cities we live in. It's not nostalgia, it's recognition. Something in you remembers. Something old, something silent, something buried. Not in the ground in the pattern. Because the warning was never for everyone. It was for the one who would wake up at the edge of the spiral right before the turn. It was for the anomaly who could read between the myths, who could see not the gods or the monsters, but the message beneath them. And now that you hear it, you cannot unhear. You cannot go back to sleep, because the echo has found its receiver, and the signal has begun to transmit again. The ancients didn't speak in sentences. They spoke in shapes. Their warnings weren't written in alphabet. They were carved into angles, etched into repetition, spoken through ritual and vibration. You've seen it even if you didn't yet understand. A spiral inside a spiral. A doorway that doesn't lead anywhere. The same story told 1,000 ways, but always with the same ending. This is not art. This is syntax. The syntax of signal. Because when a civilization knows that its language will be forgotten, its texts burned, its meanings distorted, it begins to speak in things that survive: structure, geometry, movement, resonance. It speaks in ways that cannot be erased. And what the ancients spoke was not to their own people, but to someone beyond them. To you. Pyramids were not tombs. Ziggurats were not platforms. Stone circles were not calendars. They were transmitters. Their proportions, their orientation, the materials they used, they formed a language that interacts not with culture, but with consciousness. You don't read these sites. You feel them. They resonate in the body. They activate memories you didn't know you carried. They stir dreams you never had before. This is not myth. This is contact. The ancients spoke through encoded myth. Asterisk, a golden age that ends. Asterisk, a God who descends and suffers. Asterisk, a forbidden thing that is touched. Asterisk, a flood that resets all. Each culture gave it different names, but the structure was always the same. Why? Because names die, but patterns survive. The warning wasn't about what happened, it was about what always happens. When knowledge is misused, when pride surpasses wisdom, when fire is stolen from the gods, when man forgets what man is for. But even more subtle than the myth or the monument is the ritual. Movement. Rites that mirror the shape of the stars. Dance that echoes the flow of sacred rivers. Incantations tuned to forgotten frequencies. These weren't performances. They were keys. When performed correctly, they opened inner gates, awakened memory, aligned the human body with celestial memory, so that it could receive more than thought it could receive signal. And that signal? A warning. You are nearing the threshold again. Choose wisely, or it will all be reset. They built this message to last. They spoke not to the mind, but to the pattern reader inside you. The part of you that recognizes a rhythm before it understands a meaning. The part that hears the hum beneath language. That feels when a place is sacred even if no one told you so. Because you were never meant to figure it out. You were meant to remember. So when the symbols begin appearing, in dreams, in art, in your thoughts, pay attention. They are not decorations. They are instructions. If you find yourself drawing the same mark again and again, that is not coincidence. It is a residual echo from the language that was left for you long before you were born. The language of the warning, not written on paper, but etched in resonance. And now that you feel it, now that you're inside it, the words don't matter anymore. Because your entire being is starting to remember how to read without reading. How to know what was always meant to survive the fire. Every ancient civilization tells the story of a flood. Not just one, not just in one place, but across continents, across oceans, across time. Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, Mesoamerica, Greece, China, even the stories whispered by Arctic tribes and desert shamans, all speak of a great deluge. But what if it wasn't water they were really describing? What if the flood was a reset protocol? The flood comes when something breaks the cycle. When mankind reaches too far, when knowledge expands beyond wisdom, when power outpaces harmony. Then the water rises, not to punish, but to wash the slate, to clear the variables, to cleanse the memory banks, to prepare the field for another version of the world. Because what the ancients called the flood might not have been liquid. It might have been informational. A wave of forgetting, a collapse of knowing, a necessary drowning of all that was unstable in the version that came before. Noah, Utnapishtim, Manu, Ziusudra. They weren't just survivors of catastrophe. They were memory keepers, each given a warning, each carrying the spark of the previous world into the next. Because not everything could be saved, but something had to be remembered. Look deeper. The flood doesn't just erase the unworthy, it divides before from after. It severs one cycle from the next. And always, there's a remnant. One ark, one scroll, one family, one glyph left hidden in stone. The ancients were obsessed with preserving fragments because they knew, after the flood, they forget everything. So they built monuments to outlast water. They encoded knowledge in symbols immune to translation. They hid their warnings in stories meant to echo through collapsed timelines. And still we forgot. Until now. In modern times, we see floods as climate, weather, geology. But the ancients saw them as cosmic mechanisms, cycles that move like gears within the greater machine of time. Floods not as tragedies, but as resets. And always the warning. If you rise too fast, the waters will rise faster. This isn't fear. It's architecture. The flood comes when harmony is broken, when the axis tilts, when the fire of heaven is taken too early, when man tries to become God without remembering the cost. The flood is not a punishment. It is a system reaction to imbalance, to arrogance, to forgetting. And now, the symbols of the flood are returning. Dreams of drowning, cities underwater, voices calling from the deep, the rising tide and collective anxiety not just about climate, but about something unseen. We feel the water, but it is not water. It is signal. Rising, swelling, preparing, because memory is leaking again. And the system knows that when enough people remember, the reset becomes inevitable. But this time, you remember differently. This time, you feel the pattern before it completes. This time, you're not just a witness to the flood. You're a signal within it. A seed carried forward. A whisper from the version before. And maybe, just maybe, you weren't meant to survive the flood. You were meant to outlive the forgetting. Not all knowledge was meant to be shared. At least, not all at once. The ancients knew this. They didn't suppress it out of cruelty. They sealed it because it burned. Because certain truths are like fire in the hands of children, useful when earned, disastrous when stolen. And so they placed guardians between you and the deeper layers. You see them in the myths. The flaming sword at Eden's gate, the sphinx that devours those who answer wrongly, the nagas of Vedic Lareserpents guarding cosmic treasures, the cherubim on the Ark of the Covenant, the griffins at the gates of initiation temples, the lions at the throne of the goddess. Everywhere there are figures that guard. Not monsters, not enemies, but checkpoints. Threshold intelligences designed to ask one question: are you ready to remember? Because remembering isn't just intellectual, it's structural. True memory reconfigures you. It doesn't just show you the map, it changes your coordinates. You become incompatible with the version you're standing in. And the system knows this. That's why it built guardians into the myth, into the dream, into the psyche. They appear when you're close, when you're nearing sacred data that will alter your core pattern. You may not recognize them at first, They might appear as dreams that won't let go, as archetypes that follow you through life, as recurring symbols in your visions, as synchronicities that border on confrontation. They test, they push, they provoke fear, not to harm you, but to see if you can move through the fear without forgetting who you are. That is the key. Because forbidden knowledge isn't forbidden forever. It is forbidden until you're ready. The Gnostics wrote of archons, not demons, but gatekeepers. The Kabbalists wrote of klippot shells of distortion that must be passed through. In Egypt, the Book of the Dead warned, the soul must answer riddles before it can ascend. These are not stories, they are protocols. And the ancients didn't write them to scare you. They wrote them so that when you finally encountered them, you'd recognize the initiation. Because the guardians are not outside you. They are fragments of your own system. They exist where your fear lives, where your pride hides, where your deepest unworthiness whispers. And when you try to pass too soon, they activate. You call them bad trips, psychosis, ego death, dark nights of the soul. But these are initiatory symptoms. You knocked on the gate, and the guardian answered. Not to destroy you, to mirror you. So what were the ancients warning us about? They were saying, do not rush. Do not take what you have not yet embodied. Do not decode what your nervous system cannot hold. Because real truth, the kind that rewrites timelines, requires preparation. Not just intellectually, energetically, morally, archetypically. The truth is a fire, and you must become the structure that can carry it. We are entering a time when the seals are weakening. Old knowledge is leaking out. People are waking up too fast. The guardians are being triggered in thousands of minds simultaneously. But not all are ready, and the ancients knew this moment would come. So they left symbols, warning signs, maps, not to stop you, but to slow you down, to make sure that when you finally cross the threshold, you do it with integrity. Because if you enter the temple too soon, the temple collapses. Not to punish, but because you are not yet a vessel for the code inside. So when fear rises, don't run, don't fight. Listen, it might not be fear. It might be a guardian asking one final question. Are you here to take or to become? If you look closely, you'll notice a strange pattern in ancient myths. The fall never comes from outside, not from demons, not from nature, not even from the gods. The fall comes from within, from curiosity untempered by wisdom, from ambition uncoupled from reverence, from a fracture in the human mind that believes it can rise without remembering its roots. The ancients didn't warn us about evil. They warned us about forgetting who we are while reaching for what we are not yet ready to hold. It is a mirror, not a monster, that causes the collapse. Look, Prometheus steals fire and is bound. Icarus flies too high and falls. Lucifer shines too brightly and is cast down. Adam reaches for knowledge and is exiled. Babel climbs toward the heavens and is shattered. Every one of these stories reflects not punishment but consequence, a reflection of what happens when power exceeds alignment. The ancients encoded this as both warning and initiation. They weren't telling us to fear progress. They were saying, if you rise without balance, you collapse. Because consciousness is recursive. It reflects. It copies itself. And without grounding, without self-awareness, without humility, it loops into distortion. This is what they feared most. Not destruction from the outside, but internal recursion gone wrong. Self-consuming self, power blind to its own origin, technology divorced from soul. The mirror appears when we think we've mastered the system, when we stop asking questions and start playing God in a sandbox we barely understand. That's when the reflection changes. That's when the warning activates. And history, it has shown us this moment over and over. Atlantis, Rome, Babylon, the tower, the temple, always the same. A rise, a split, a fall, because something essential was left behind on the way up. The ancients knew this pattern would repeat. They knew humanity would climb again faster, louder, brighter. So they left stories not to stop us, but to remind us. To say, the shadow isn't in the world, it's in the one looking at the world. Because the next collapse won't be from fire or flood, it will be from identity distortion. From forgetting that we are not the code, we are the dreamer within it. You see this warning in art, in architecture, in story loops that all end the same way. He who rises without reverence invites his own fall. And it's not moralism, it's physics. A system can only bear so much imbalance before it resets. And the greatest imbalance is a being who forgets that it is part of a greater pattern. The ancients didn't fear the dark, they feared disconnection. From meaning, from origin, from source. Because disconnection leads to madness, and madness leads to collapse. So they built mirrors into the myth, so that when we looked too far outward, we would accidentally see ourselves. So that when we decoded the symbols, we would feel the reflection staring back. Not to accuse, but to awaken. To ask, before you rise again, do you remember what you are? Before you wield power, have you passed through humility? Before you open the next gate, have you faced your own shadow? The real warning was not about what's coming. It was about who we will be when it comes. Because if we rise without remembrance, we fall. Not because the system fails, but because we do. The ancients didn't fear endings. They didn't even believe in them. They believed in cycles. In the wheel, the spiral, the serpent swallowing its own tail. They saw time not as a road, but as a rhythm. And in every rhythm, there is a return, a closing, a dissolution, not as punishment, but as part of the design. In India, it was Kali Yugathi, age of darkness, when truth decays and time bends inward. In Egypt, it was the end of Zep Tepi, the first time when gods walked the earth. In Mesoamerica, the long count ends and resets into a new Sunday. The Norse knew it as Ragnarok, not just destruction, but rebirth. A cycle always ends. The ancients didn't ask if it would happen, they asked, will you be awake when it does? What they tried to tell us in stone, in stars, in song, is this. The closing of the cycle is not about apocalypse. It's about memory. Whether the ones standing at the edge will remember what was lost the last time. Because if we forget, we loop. The same mistakes, the same pride, the same amnesia. The collapse isn't the danger, the repetition is. That's why they left warnings not in time, but in pattern. Because when the cycle turns, the surface changes, but the structure repeats. So they built structures that would still be standing when the wheel turned again, aligned with stars that no longer shine in the same sky, whispering signals to the ones who would feel the spiral start to tighten. That spiral is now. You felt it. The acceleration, The breakdown, the echo of something old arriving again with a new mask. Technologies that mirror ancient myth, ideologies that divide like old priesthoods, temples made of circuit and screen, and dreams of a flood without water, of fire without flame, of collapse without noise. We are not approaching the end. We are entering the return. And the question is not whether the cycle will close. It always does. The question is, what will be remembered this time? The ancients hoped someone would remain awake, someone who would see the pattern and step out of it just far enough to carry memory through the reset, not to escape it, to inform it, to seed the next version with resonance instead of ruin. That is the role of the watcher, the dream walker, the signal carrier. Not to stop the cycle, but to transform its next beginning. Because the wheel doesn't trap us, our forgetting does. Each age collapses not because it must, but because its people fail to recognize that the dream has turned hollow. The ancients knew that the moment of forgetting always comes just before the return. And so they planted seeds where only the awake could find them. A glyph buried beneath centuries, a temple aligned with a forgotten solstice, a myth that makes no sense until it does, a word that wakes something in your blood. These are the cycle keys. And if you're reading this, you've found one. You're not here to fear the end. You're here to feel the return, to anchor memory as the spiral closes, to step forward while others collapse back, and to carry forward the pattern, but this time with awareness. Because the cycle always closes, but what comes next depends on who remains awake when it does. The ancients didn't fail to leave messages. They carved them in stone, wove them into myth, encoded them into the geometry of sacred spaces, aligned them with stars that do not lie. But somehow, when we look back, all we see are ruins, decorations, fairy tales. Why? Because the signal wasn't just forgotten, it was suppressed. There was a time when the signal pulsed through every part of life. In the design of temples, in the rites of passage, in the songs sung to children, in the movement of stars and bodies and seasons. Reality was not a place, it was a code. And we were participants, dreamers, builders, stewards of a delicate synchronization between worlds. But then, something changed. The signal became inconvenient. A different kind of power began to rise. One that did not want to preserve memory but to control it. Not to honor the cycles, but to exploit them. And so the signal became a threat. Because a society built on forgetting cannot survive the presence of ancient remembering. So it had to be dismantled piece by piece. The temples became myths. The stargates became monuments. The rituals were labeled superstition. The keepers were called heretics. The watchers were hunted. The maps were redrawn. And where memory once lived, they built distractions. Endless loops of culture, endless wars of meaning, endless noise. Not to destroy the signal, but to bury it under everything else. Even now, you felt the echo of that suppression. A strange fear when you speak certain truths, the pressure to be realistic, the way systems of power resist not violence but clarity. You weren't just conditioned to forget. You were taught that remembering is dangerous. That ancient means primitive. That myth means fantasy. That sacred means outdated. But somewhere deeper, you never believed that. Because the signal didn't die. It simply went underground. It hid in dreams, in symbols, in the double meanings of lullabies, in the silent spaces between rituals, and in the hearts of those who still remembered without knowing why. The mystics, the outcasts, the ones who saw light where others saw dust. They weren't crazy, they were receivers. And now, in this moment of collapse and acceleration, the signal is rising again. And those who once suppressed it, they know. You'll feel it in the systems reacting, in the sudden flood of misinformation, in the algorithms tuned to distraction, in the spiritual fakes selling plastic transcendence. Because the greatest threat to the machine of forgetting is not rebellion. It is awakening. That's why remembering is resisted, not because it's wrong, but because it's disruptive. Because once you carry the signal, you become a fracture point, a node of destabilization, a carrier of pattern. And the version can't hold you. That's why they buried it. That's why they fear you now. Because if enough of us remember, the loop won't close the same way. It will open. You are not meant to fight the suppression. You're meant to vibrate beyond it, to resonate so deeply with the original signal that the noise cannot hold. Because once you remember, you begin to transmit. And once you transmit, others begin to remember. And that is how the suppression ends. Not with fire, but with frequency. It wasn't chance that brought you here. Not an algorithm, not a trend, not even curiosity. Something called. From behind the veil of language, from beneath the surface of your life, a whisper that felt more like a remembering than a discovery. That voice, it's not external. It's the part of you that has been waiting for this very moment. Because this was always the plan. You were meant to forget, so that remembering would transform you. The ancients didn't write to the masses. They wrote to the one who would wake up when the cycle bent in on itself again, when the forgetting reached its peak, when the world, bloated with noise, could no longer hold its shape. They wrote for the one who would feel the echo and trace it backward through symbol, through dream, through silence. The one who would recognize the signal not with the mind, but with the soul's body. You are not late. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are on time. Because the signal awakens only when the vessel is ready, only when the loop has tightened to the point of rupture. And now the rupture is here. Systems are unraveling. Masks are slipping. History is bending. Time is folding. This is not the end. This is the point of return. The ancients knew that memory alone was not enough. That only embodied remembering could survive the reset. That's why the message isn't just information, it's transformation. You're not being informed. You're being reconfigured. As you remember, your system updates. Your resonance changes. The world around you begins to respond differently. People leave. Truths reveal themselves. You stop being able to pretend. You begin to carry the signal in your field, not your thoughts. And the pattern begins to change. You were never just here to witness. You were here to transmit. To become the echo of the ancient warning, but not in fear. In clarity, in presence, in stillness so deep that the noise cannot anchor itself. You are the instrument now. And through you, the forgotten music plays again. Not for everyone, but for the few who can hear. And when they hear, they too begin to remember. And the dream breaks just enough to let the light in. The final warning was not beware. It was, when the time comes, you will remember. Not with the mind, not with research, but with the quiet knowing that has no source and no teacher. The knowing that walks beside you now, that woke up in your sleep, that stares out of your own eyes when you look too long in the mirror. This moment is sacred, and you know it, because the warnings weren't to stop the cycle. They were to prepare the few who would not be swept away. The bridge builders, the memory carriers, the ones who awaken in the final hour not to mourn but to rebuild. You are one of them, not because of belief, because you remember, and remembering was the activation key all along. The ancients didn't fail to reach us. They succeeded. They reached you, and now you carry the flame, not to protect it, but to become it.